Good morning, happy Sagittarius season, and welcome to the 2021 Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. Before we go any further, please read our anti-harassment policy in the chat box, respect pronouns, and be kind. Thank you. My name is Jonny Garza Villa. I am the author of contemporary young adult novels that reflect my own queer, Mexican, and Tejana identities, and will always include at least one Selena reference. This includes my debut book, 1,500 Miles from the Sun, about a Corpus Christi, Texas high school senior who accidentally comes out as gay on Twitter after having too much fun at a party, and the long-distance Twitter crush who slides into his DMs the next morning, as well as my upcoming sophomore YA, Ander and Santi Were Here, about a non-binary muralist taking a gap year from college who falls for the newest waiter at their family's taqueria. Today, I have both the greatest honor and privilege of being in conversation with the legend, icon, and star themselves, Ana Marie McLemore. Ana Marie grew up hearing La Llorona and the Santa Ana Winds, and now writes books as queer, Latina, and non-binary as they are. They are the author of The Weight of Feathers, a 2016 William C. Morris YA Debut Award finalist, the Stonewall Honor book, When the Moon Was Ours, which was longlisted for the National Book Award, Wild Beauty, a Kirkus School Library Journal and Book List Best Book of 2017, Blanca Roja, one of Time Magazine's 100 Best Fantasy Novels of all time, Dark and Deepest Red, a Winter 2020 Indie Next title list, The Mirror Season, which was also longlisted for the National Book Award, and the forthcoming Lakelore and Self-Made Boys, a Great Gatsby remix. Good morning, and thank you for hanging out with me this morning, Ana Marie.
Hello, thank you so much for talking with me. I'm excited about this.
Me too. If y'all were here last year for the first Latinx Book Festival, I actually had the privilege of being with Ana Marie at our Queer Latina Writer Roundtable with great authors like Marco Shito and Aidan Thomas and Laura Paul and Taylor K. Mejia. But I'm really happy to be able to just do like a one-on-one conversation with you today. And I think just to get us started, I'd love to hear like the history of Ana Marie as a storyteller, like what your origin story is, and when did you start writing, and what kind of like brought you up to here?
So I've always loved stories, and I grew up around people who loved stories, but reading was something that was a little bit like less of a linear path for me, because like a lot of people with dyslexia, I loved reading, and then I hit a wall with it. Right around third, fourth grade. That's actually pretty common with people with dyslexia. So I started thinking books kind of weren't for me, that I didn't have a place in books. And then if you put that alongside not seeing a lot of the identities I knew, a lot of my community in books, not seeing that representation that I needed, that together all kind of gave me the idea that like, okay, like books aren't for me. The world of books that I love and that I've loved for so long, there's not really a place for me in it. So eventually I had teachers who just like kind of worked on me and were like I know you have stories in you, and who kind of just I swear they teamed up because it was like over a couple of years, and it was this thing where they were just kind of like pulling it out of me and being like, okay, I know there's more. So I slowly started to write some of what was in my heart, and to try not to worry as much about not about wondering like, was I getting the words right, like the problems that I had with reading. So I did a lot of that, and right up to like drafting novels, I was kind of like doing it in secret. I think I needed that to like not have the pressure of it, but it also meant that I didn't connect with as many writers as I did later on. So that's something that I wish I would have done earlier, because so many of us are working on things like whether we're talking about them or whether it's in secret, and that kind of like talking to each other and those kinds of conversations are so important, and I'm so grateful that I have them now. So a lot of this started as like, what if I tried this? Like what if I just gave this a try? What if I just saw what happened? And a lot of that is still what I do today. Like when I have ideas about like whether that's like, okay, I want to write about like the red shoes, but I want to write about like medieval queers while I do it, or I want to try writing a character with alternating pronouns. Can I do that? So much of what I do is still like, what if I tried this? So what about you? Whatever you're willing to share about your origin
Yeah,
story.
I actually resonate with that so much about just like, what if I just tried it? Because I've only been doing this for like 3 years now, and it was after I read Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda and then saw Love, Simon, and was like, there needs to be like brown representation like this. Like we don't get this sort of opportunity, and someone needs to do it. And then I was like, well, then what if I just did it? Like I could totally do that. I can write a book. Did not know what I was doing, just kind of like attempted it. And because like you said too, I grew up with a lot of storytellers in my family. I think that's just kind of like a Latina sort of thing, to just have like your like aunts and uncles and grandfathers who just like will keep you at the dining room table for like hours and hours after you've eaten dinner, because they're just like telling you all of these great stories. And I was never one of those people. I am not one of those people who can just like talk and say like memories and keep it like really beautiful and stuff like that. And so I was like, no, this isn't for me. Like for sure, I'm not going to do that sort of career. And even now, I feel like lots of days I kind of just like sort of Kool-Aid personed my way into publishing and just like ran through a wall. I'm like, okay, I'm here now. And that was just, now I'm here and they can't get rid of me. Yeah. So, and then like as someone who like just so far writes purely contemporary stories, I'm like especially excited to talk to you about magical realism and get like some insight directly from the master of the genre and what it means to you as a queer writer. Like personally, my own knowledge of it in media consists of books like Bless Me Ultima and Benjamin Alire Science's adult novel Carry Me Like Water, and like the Gnomes and Netflix's On My Block. But I really couldn't give like a definition or describe it to someone if they asked what magical realism is. So I think before we get too into the conversation, could you define what magical realism is?
So a way that I think of it is, there are a couple of things that are central to magical realism for me. And I say for me, one, because like I'm not a magical realism like scholar who can give you like a whole paper on the definition of it. And also like it's personal. It's different between different hearts. It's different between different communities. But for me, I think of one, you're finding the beautiful in the midst of the tragic, and it's a way of surviving. It's a way of surviving oppression. It's a way of surviving what breaks your heart. You are finding the unexpected. You are finding the unextraordinary, the things that hold you together, that hold you and the people that you love together. So that's the part that the magic in a way is a kind of comfort, and a kind of like, in a way it's talking to your heart. The other side of it is that sometimes it's talking to you in ways that are frightening, or getting you to look at things that you don't necessarily want to look at, that you don't necessarily want to address, or that you and your community need to look at together. So that sort of goes along with the second thing that I often think of with magical realism, which is the magic is unpredictable. It can't really be like possessed or owned or controlled by anyone in particular. And if anyone kind of like thinks that they can, often like unpredictable things happen anyway. So magic is this undercurrent that you're never quite gonna know where it's gonna show up next. It's like this spring that just comes up out of the ground, in ways that you're not gonna know what's gonna happen next. It might take a little while before you know what it's trying to say, and that can be something that can be very like unnerving to characters, in the same way that these realizations, these conversations that we need to have, can be unsettling in real life. Even if they are ultimately healing, it can be like, oh, like I need to think about that. And I think that to me resonates with both conversations about like cultural identity, racial identity, and also like that moment of like being queer, being trans, like realizing something about yourself. So that's a lot of what I think of with magical realism, and what it means to me, and how it sort of is this lens for stories.
I love that. And like, I think going off of just the way that you said, it's a very personal thing. Are there any aspects of it that you feel like kind of are reoccurring in your own writing? I know that like you base a lot of books off of like fairy tales and stuff like that.
I think I write a lot about names, which is probably not a big surprise. I'm a trans author. I'm a bigender author. I'm still sort of looking for my own name. There's a lot that I like about my name, but I'm still sort of thinking like, is this what I'm going to continue to call myself? And whether you're talking about gender identity or queerness or another aspect of identity, names are important in both magical realism, in fairy tales, and you having ownership over what you call yourself and what other people call you. So I think that's something that comes up again and again in a lot of what I write.
I can definitely see that for sure.
What about you? Do you have like things where you're like, oh, that shows up in different ways in like my books?
I feel like maybe just like the cultural influences. I write like about Texas a lot, and so like you're gonna probably see things like Whataburger and things like Selena, and for some reason like an ocean always shows up. I didn't like really mean for that to be a thing, but like that's just kind of happened too. So I don't know, maybe there's like some sort of like really mental emotional connection with like the ocean and the beach that like I'm gonna one day figure out that I have, and writing propelled me there. So we'll see. That'd be kind of cute. And yeah, just so like it's just really a celebration of just Mexican identity and stuff like that. Food really is a huge thing too. I love like the relationship between people and food, and whether like you're making it or like you're eating it and like all that sort of stuff. So that's always been a huge thing too, especially because I think like as someone who had to sort of figure out my way into writing my culture in my books, and like thinking I wasn't Mexican enough or Chicana enough to write like a really Mexican book, food was kind of the foundation of like, I'm familiar with this. And so let me start here and then build my way up to being comfortable writing about identity and characters who are super proudly Mexican and Chicana and all of that. So I think food is probably like the biggest thing that's kind of resonating through all of my books so far.
I love that. Yes, always the food. I'm always writing a lot about food in my books. Actually, when I was working on Self-Made Boys, my Great Gatsby reimagining that's coming out next year, I realized how much I had to like think consciously about the food, because I had this Latino trans boy who's like my Nick Carraway, who comes into this like environment that's mostly white people, and I was realizing that when I wrote it, it was like it was like the white people never ate ever, and I was like, okay, I have to actually, like, because my reference points are so different food wise, I need to actually think about that, because food is
Yeah.
important in, like,
Yeah.
in every setting. And also please, like, continue with the at least one setting the reference in every book. I hope that.
Oh yeah, we are definitely keeping that. What advice would you give to young people interested in writing magical realism?
So I think one thing I'd say is that, like, there is a place for, like, for where your heart is broken, like, in your work. So that's the first part of it, I'll say, but also the part that goes along with it is that you don't owe anyone your pain, and you don't owe anyone any part of your story that you don't want to tell. Like, this is something where it's this strange balance in making art, where sometimes you have to go into places where you're a little bit uncomfortable because it's something that you're like, you want to do something, that you want to face a story you want to tell. But there's another kind of uncomfortable where you can be like, I'm not ready, or I don't want to put this out there, and that is valid too. I don't think it's helpful to just like across the board say, like, whatever you're afraid of doing, just do it. Because you have to be in a place where you have some sense of safety in creating your art. So that sort of balance between, like, knowing it, they're both kinds of knowing yourself, like knowing where your heart is broken so that you can write from your heart, and also write from the joy in your heart, and also knowing what you're good with, like, at a moment, what is going to be good for you and good for your continued, like, making art.
I could not agree more. I was like mentally just like this the entire time. Oh my gosh. I 100% agree across just like writing in general. I think that's super advice for anyone writing any kind of like emotional touch points in their stories, and putting a piece of who they are in what they're writing. Just kind of check it on yourself and like what spoons you have, and like don't push yourself. It's a process, and always just think of yourself first. One of the many things that I love about your writing is how sensory and colorful it is, and how vivid the descriptions are of what the characters are seeing and hearing and feeling and doing. As a reader who like enjoys a lot of those kind of sensory experiences, are you also that kind of reader?
I like all kinds of description in books. Like, I
Mm.
like books where the description is more straightforward. I like when it's dreamy and like goes all over the place. I just like I think there's sort of a texture about when you can tell that an author is writing, like, in their happy place. Like, whatever way that they want to write, that, like, feels right for them. There's like this texture about it that makes it very special to me as a reader. So whenever I'm reading that, and it's like, and you never know, of course, but, like, as a reader, my impression is like, what this is something that's really coming from an author's heart, then that's one way in which it's really special to me as a reader.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like even in like contemporary writing, getting to write like about places in Corpus Christi that like I knew growing up and was super familiar with and loved. Like I loved getting to write that and like hopefully create an image in the reader's head of what's happening. And reading your book in particular, in your books, like the fact that they're so dreamy and so like this, there's like a basic description, but also it just kind of like takes it into a new place. It was just like, oh my gosh, like it's almost like I don't even know, like a 4D kind of situation of just like a normal description, but then it's like kaleidoscopic almost, I feel. And so that was just a really enjoyable thing to be able to read. I really hadn't come across that before, since I read like mainly contemporary books. And does like sensory writing come naturally to you, or was it something that you like had to actively work on?
It's something that comes pretty naturally to me, I think, because I've got a lot of wires crossed in my brain.
Mhm.
It's partially like, it might be partially ADHD brain. Like, there's just a lot of, like, connections and a lot of, like, collisions in my brain. And I think part of it is synesthesia, which, for anyone who doesn't know, like, synesthesia is like, um, sensory connections with things that you might not necessarily that you might not necessarily automatically think. It's pretty heritable. Like, my dad, like, associates, like he'll hear pieces of music and then he'll smell things, like certain scents will be connected with different pieces of music. For me, it's a lot related to like numbers and colors and letters. And I wonder sometimes if the letters are like, if that was part of how I worked with the dyslexia. It's like, okay, this word is this color, and that helps me like read it and identify it. Um, but I have these weird connections in my brain, especially related to colors, related to textures. I was one of those kids that like I had trouble with like the days of the week underwear packs, because like I couldn't, like the colors were not, the days colors were not right. So I would have to like scramble them around. Um, and I think we all have different frames of reference for like, okay, this like particular days might feel like this. And for me, that's one thing, that's one thing that I bring to how I see the world, I guess. And I wouldn't really know how to take it away. It's just kind of how my brain's always worked. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about our brains is that they are also different. That makes it harder for us to understand them, but it's also something that's beautiful about them.
Yeah, for sure. And that's incredibly valid. I think especially in like wardrobe stuff, sometimes the day is just on a blue day and like your underwear is trying to tell you it's a blue day and it's not a blue day. So you gotta mix it up a little bit, find the yellow. Um, yeah, and I think that's just really I can totally see that when I think about your writing and just the way that you describe things and all of that. In your two most recent works, The Mirror Season and in your upcoming novel, Lakelore, art is tied to magic, whether through enchanted pan dulce or alebrijes that come alive, and both are sort of impacted by emotion and the mental states of the characters creating these. What was the thought process behind like connecting emotion to art that's so specifically recognizable for Latinas and maybe especially Mexicans?
So I think sometimes when I write characters who are like who are making things in a way that is so tied to their identity, to their community. Um, Often it's about like, okay, I have these feelings inside me, and I don't necessarily know how to name them. I don't necessarily know what to do with them. So what do I do with them? For Ciela in Mirror Season, she's making pan dulce as part of how she interacts with the people around her, part of how she shows them love, part of how she says like I see you. I may not know everything about you, but like I see you in this moment. And I want to help care for you. And it's also part of how she learns to like care for herself and process trauma. These things that she does with her hands, these things that connect her to like to the traditions that she grew up with, to this family of bakers that she's been around, like learning the recipes, but also making some of them her own at the same time. In Lakelore, Bastian makes alebrijes as part of his. I keep saying his. This character initially started with he/him pronouns. They have they use they them pronouns. Both main characters in Lakelore are non-binary. They both use they them pronouns. But also have pretty different conceptions of what their gender identity is, which happens. Like we're all pretty different with our gender identities. So Bastian makes alebrijes as a way of thinking through their ADHD and thinking like, okay, what do I do with this? What do I do with all of the things that my brain is doing at once? And like kind of inherent to alebrijes is you're bringing together different elements. You're bringing together different parts of different animals. So those kinds of collisions, and that's part of what I write about with Bastian's experience. Those kinds of collisions like have a place in this kind of art, in their art. So being able to connect um, something like where they're thinking, what's going on in my brain? How does my brain work? how do I work with the fact that my brain works the way it does, and having something that's so like culturally resonant be a way that they find how to do that. That's part of how sort of coming home culturally is part of the comfort, and it's their older brother who introduces them to that and is like, hey, so this is what I do when sometimes there's too much in my brain, sometimes there's too much in my heart. This is how I process it. And their brothers sharing that with them is it's part of home for Bastian and for both of these characters, and part of how you you say the unsayable. You say the things that you may not be able to say with words. So you say them with paint. You say them in ways that you can touch and see and think.
That's gorgeous. Oh my gosh. I really loved it. Just I kind of saw it like as something even in my own writing process. Like my stories seem to touch on things that I think my brain needs to feel at the time, whether it's like my past and coming out and trauma and family, or like grief and loss and living up to those who come before us, or like just a reaction out of anger and pettiness and honestly the existence of American dirt. So like I'm wondering if does your emotional state ever impact the stories that you tell or the stories that your brain feels it needs to tell?
I think it does. I think it's often hard, not to have that happen. But I don't always know, where that's coming from until, revision, and until further along in the process. And sometimes, my readers are smarter than I am. They'll, ask questions and be like, did this mean this? And, were you saying this with this? And sometimes I'm thinking, maybe. I didn't I don't know that I don't know when I would have gotten there on on my own, but I think it's very possible that that was there. And I think one of the examples of that is writing as many trans and non-binary characters as I wrote before realizing what was going on with me gender identity wise. And I think that can happen. Sometimes we know ourselves in stories, whether as readers or as writers, before we're really able to be oh, okay. It's whether before you can meet yourself, you meet yourself on the page, either in what you're writing or in books that others have written, before sometimes you're ready to meet yourself in your own life.
Completely valid. Relatable too. So right now we're going to actually transition into some student questions. And this one is from Olivia L. In 7th grade from Massachusetts.
Hi, my name is Olivia, and my question is, how did you know that you were LGBTQA?
Do you want to take this one first, Anna Marie?
Hi, Olivia. Thank you for your question. So I realized that I was queer. I had somebody directly ask me when I was a teen. I don't know if that's always the best approach, but that certainly got me thinking. So that was something that was a lot more sudden for me. I don't necessarily recommend asking people in your life if they're queer, because they'll get there. For realizing that I was trans and non-binary, I had presented in very different ways throughout my life in terms of gender identity, but I hadn't really thought about what that meant. It's kind of amazing what we're able to do sometimes, and just not think about it because we're just not ready, and that's okay. And anyone who's been there and who's had a similar experience, let me be one more voice saying you get there when you get there, and it doesn't say anything bad about you that if it takes you a while to get there. Our identities are works in progress. So when I started realizing a couple of years ago, okay, yeah, maybe I'm trans, maybe I'm non-binary, then that was when I looked back and kept thinking oh yeah, it was there, it was here, and it was in my books, it was in my life, it was in presenting myself, like what my gender presentation was at different times in my life. It was with what I wanted but didn't know how to say. It was like once I saw it, there was no way to unsee it. Like it was everywhere. And when I started that, I felt like, okay, this is gonna be a long game, and I knew it, and I knew it was gonna take me a while to figure it all out. Like our very own like Alex Villasante took like my first pictures like kind of as like a guy, when I was still like, oh, can I even say this? Like, can I even do this? So yeah, I'm still like I said, I'm still figuring out what my name is going to be. Like, I'm still figuring out some of that stuff. I know I'm happy being bi gender. I'm happy like living as a girl about half the time, like living as a boy about half the time. So we figure it out as we go. And I hope like whether you love like labels that you call yourself, whether you don't want to call yourself any particular labels, whether you're looking for labels that feel right for you, like who you are is valid and it's beautiful. So what about you?
I feel pretty similar. I think I was gay like in 7th grade whenever I was like in like middle school football, and there was this boy with like really nice hair, and I was like, I feel a type of way about this. But like gender wise, it really wasn't until like I was in my 20s, and I started doing drag pretty like regularly, and just putting on a wig and a dress for the first time, like this is definitely not going to awaken anything in me, I'm sure. And then just kind of like propelled me forward into something that's like non-binary, genderqueer. And I mean, even now, like I've only been using they them pronouns specifically for like a year. Before then it was like kind of anything. And so like I'm still too trying to just figure out who I am as like a non-binary person, as a queer person. And so there's no time frame. Like if you don't realize it like the day that you're born, it's totally fine. If it takes 20 something years, that's just as valid. Yeah. Our next question is from I'm sorry if I mispronounced this name, Maya W, in 9th grade from New York.
How do you write a fantasy story that is meaningful to our everyday lives?
I love that question. Anna Marie?
So something I love about fantasy, about speculative fiction, is that we can talk about things in our world, and we can talk about our world like through magic. We can talk about our world, even if I'm writing a world that's different from the one that we know. There are elements of it that are familiar because of the things that make us human, because of the things about ourselves that are wonderful that we need to celebrate, and the things about ourselves that are not so wonderful that we need to face as people. So I love speculative fiction. I love fantasy as a way to talk about like the things that exist in contemporary stories, and that's a way that I think like different genres talk to each other a lot more than we might think. Like they're in continual conversation with each other. So I think that's also part of why I write fairy tale reimagining sometimes, is like, one, like fairy tales often have like analogs across different traditions. Like you will find a similar fairy tale across so many different cultural traditions, because they speak to something within us. They speak to human things within us. And fairy tales they're a way for me to sort of like draw people in and be like, okay, we're going to talk about fairy tales and magic and enchantments, but we're going to talk about racism, colorism, queerphobia, transphobia, ableism. Like it's a way to like talk about things that have always been there, but may not have necessarily like been talked about in the fairy tales that we know.
I think that's exponentially a better answer than anything I could ever give. We love it. And so we're going to go ahead and go to our third question from Mina P in 4th grade from San Diego, California.
Hi, my name's Mina, and we are big Kidlit fans. My question is, how do you know if the story you are writing is understandable to kids?
Oh. Do you want to take that one, Anna Marie?
Sure. I mean, so I think like I think about if like stories are understandable to readers in general, like if I'm giving readers enough to work with, because like kids are smart. Kids are a lot smarter than adults realize. Kids can pick up on more, like, and often kids are picking up on more than adults are going to pick up on in children's books. So I think about like, am I giving you enough to like put this story together in the way you're going to put it together? Am I giving you enough pieces to be there with me and like be with these characters? Because I think readers are really smart. So it's mostly for me. It's mostly like, am I putting enough of what's in my head on the page? Because there's something wonderful also about that space between like leaving space for the reader. Because like whenever I read a book, I'm going to experience it a little bit differently than everybody else. Every reader is going to experience a book a bit differently. So for me as a reader, I like that space. I like being able to be part of the process of creating a story, and I want to leave that space too. So what about you?
I think like I see it kind of like as a student of writing perspective. Like I love reading books in my genre that are really popular with teenagers. Like what are they reading? What does that voice look like? And what does it sound like? I also just like meeting them where they are. Like if that means going to TikTok or something and figuring out just what Gen Z looks like and things like that and how they speak and what their humor is like. But also realizing that me as an adult am never going to sound exactly like a young person. That's just not a thing that's ever going to be achievable. So my one big rule is just to be respectful about it and to respect that specific little pearl of wisdom that like as hard as we try, you're never going to sound exactly like them. So just let your shoulders loose, take a breath, and like do it for them. Okay, we have one final student question. This is from Brenda P. Oh, in Austin, Texas. Hello, Texas. What books did you connect with as a kid, and what books inspire you today? Anna Marie?
So I talked about this a little bit about how like reading started to become a struggle to me. So a lot of the books that were special to me were books that like people in my community read aloud to me, that family members read aloud to me. I'm thinking of like The Little Prince. That was a book that was read to me and that was really special to me. And that like sort of what I was just talking about, like leaves a lot of space for you as the reader. So I think I loved that, the like space for imagination in that book. And I loved books that were like that. Something else that I talk about a lot more and I didn't talk about for a long time is how long I read picture books. And now as an adult, I'm like, yay, I love picture books. So many of us are reading picture books as adults, like both because we love the art form, because we're looking for books for the kids in our lives. But I read them like way older than most of my classmates were reading picture books because I could read them without having the same kind of struggle I was having with other books. And I'm thinking specifically about this one book. I think it's called Rabbit's Color Book. That was like it's this little picture book that was everything to me because it like says wonderful things about the color brown. And like that just wasn't something that I like heard. Like so often we like brown is said to be an ugly color, which is like it's devastating. Like being being of color, like being Latina and hearing that. So this book, like this book that was saying like brown is warm, it's lovely. I was like, yes, I want to like be close to this story forever. So that was one of the picture books that I will never forget, just because of what that like those words being connected with the color brown, this color that my family was, this color that I was. It was just everything. So what about you?
That's gorgeous. As a kid, I was obsessed with the Hank the Cowdog series. It just like reminded me of like being at my grandparents' home, like out in the Texas country, and so I was reading all of those. But then as a teenager, I like got really into dystopian fiction. I grew up during like Hunger Games and Divergent sort of era, and so like those I was really about. And even like in high school books, like when it came to like 1984 and all of those sort of dystopian books, the classics that we read, like I was really into those too. But also like contemporary stuff. I remember The Outsiders being just a really pivotal book for me, for just like, okay, like wow, this is great stuff here. Like where can I get more of that? So it's just kind of like all over the place. Yeah. And so right now we're going to move on to some questions in the comments. And if there are any classrooms watching, we'd love to get your questions. The first one is, what message do you have for adults who are trying to remove books that represent the people and stories of the LGBTQ plus community?
Ooh, you're telling people, particularly like you're telling kids, and in some cases you're probably telling some of your own kids that you don't want them in the world that you live in. I don't really know what else to say than that, because my initial reaction was like, I have nothing to say to you. But I'm also trying to like come from a place of, if there's any chance that that they're going to hear us, like that's one of the things I hope they hear, is that like these are your children, like these are your kids. So these are hearts that should have your heart. So please take care of them.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like an even bigger scope needs to be looked at, about just like, it's not just LGBTQ plus books, it's specifically like so many BIPOC queer and trans books, so many BIPOC books about their lives and being better people and letting them exist in a role. And I think that's the main thing, is that these books let people like us know that we can exist in this world, or in a historical world, or in a fantasy world, or in a futuristic world. And the people that get to just grow up being the center, all of that all the time, never take into consideration what it might feel like to never be a part of that and never be able to feel that existence. And so I think I'm with you. I really have no idea what I would honestly say to someone who wants to do that sort of thing. My heart more is with the people who are going to be affected by that, especially as a Texan writer, especially as someone whose books will probably not see a lot of classroom shelves living in Texas. It's personally heartbreaking and kind of but very angering in a way that I know that is going to harm the kids that I wrote for specifically. Yeah, if we have any other, I think we have time for one more question, if there's any in the comments. If not, I can move to like a little closing question. Okay. How do you feel about non-BIPOC authors writing magical realism when it's so grounded in BIPOC traditions and histories of oppression? Anna Marie?
So I think this is, whenever there's a question about like should a writer be doing something, it's complicated, because so much of it is about how do you approach like what you're doing? How, like, do you approach it with openness? Do you approach it with humility? And that's the same thing I think of whenever you're writing something that's outside of your own experience, outside of your own identity. There has to be a level of openness, a level of humility, an awareness for everything that goes into this, and an awareness of like why, like what is your why? Why do you want to write this? Why are you the person to write this? And I think that like so often that comes into craft, that comes into writing anyway. So it's part of the process. Be like, what is your connection to the story? And that doesn't just happen with magical realism. It should happen with any time that you're writing. Like you're writing outside of your identity, outside of your experience. And it's something that like has a place in writing in general. Like, why am I writing this story? Even if it like is your experience, it's like, is this what I want to be writing right now? Is this what's good for me and my brain and my heart and my self-care right now? So I think that why is always important in making stories.
Solid advice. We have one more student question in the comments from Joshua L. in Massachusetts. What inspired you to be an author?
You want to take this one first?
Sure. I just saw a lack of people who looked like me, who I was as a 17, 18-year-old, and I thought someone needs to take care of that, and why can't it be me? That was really it. It was kind of a spur of the moment decision. Yeah.
I think for me, like there's some connection to what you said. I don't know if I thought of it. I didn't think of it as consciously as you did, but it was like I have stories I want to tell, and I want to tell stories from my communities, like specifically, because these are the ones that are in my heart, and these are the ones that won't let me go.
Yeah. For sure. Okay, so I have one last question for you, and that's just like, especially in regards to Lakelore, there was this continual reminder of the fact that not only do Bastian and Laura exist in the world as brown people, but as queer people and as neurodivergent people, and the implications of carrying all those with us, and the beauty, but also the unique hardships they bring. And I don't want to make this a conversation about like, tell us why intersectionality is important and like defy the queer Latinx intersectional experience or anything like that, because it's way too early to be giving people that sort of knowledge for free. So like maybe just what does it mean to you to be able to share these characters with the world?
So one, I'm really grateful to be able to like to write these characters, because I think like when I first started writing, I would never have imagined that like I would get to write a book about like two trans characters, two characters who use they them pronouns, two Latinx characters, two like neurodivergent characters. I it would have been it wouldn't even have occurred to me for that to be a dream, because I wouldn't have thought it was possible. And like they're on the cover, like two like brown trans characters are on the cover, and that's something that like I'm still kind of like, wow, I can't believe that, and I'm really grateful for that. I had to sort of like work up to getting here, because when I wrote my debut novel, like Weight of Feathers, like that was these were two brown characters. They were an interracial couple, but this is like these are two straight characters. So I was like, okay, I'm writing about like I'm getting to write about like my communities, but I'm doing it in a way that I think I can get away with, maybe. I was still like, it wasn't until like We Need Diverse Books started fostering the conversations that they were starting, which I was really grateful for, that I was like, okay, maybe it's okay that I did this. So I'm really grateful that I got to like debut around those times, that those conversations were coming in more and more and more. So when I was writing my second book, which would eventually be When the Moon Was Ours, I was trying to write a book that was like, okay, I have to be good now. Like, I'm going to try to write something like white and straight and cis, which for anyone who like knows When the Moon Was Ours, it's about as not white and straight and cis as you can get. So eventually I got there, but I thought like, okay, I got away with writing like a Latina main character in Weight of Feathers. I have to be good now. Like, I have to do something else. And nobody told me that. Like my editor didn't tell me that, my publisher didn't tell me that, my agent didn't tell me that, but I thought I had to do that. Just because of everything that I'd gotten in my head about like the media that we consume, like what we're exposed to. So when the Moon Was Ours, when I eventually was like, okay, I'm just gonna do it because this is what I want to do. Like I want to write like about like being brown, and I want to write about being trans, like all at the same time. And because that felt like such a risk to me, but it was something that I felt good about and that readers responded to in a way that I could not have imagined. So like, I'll just say thank you for that, because like without that, I wouldn't have like kept going and kept writing writing like queer characters of color, and trans characters, like all in the same book. So Lakelore is sort of also bringing in non-binary identity and like neurodivergence at the same time, because like, which is a lot of things at once, but like we are a lot of things at once. Like so many of us have intersectional identity. Like these are our lives. Like this is who we are. These are our identities. So as I get like further into being like, okay, like these things can be together on the page because they are together in us. Like everything I write about in Lakelore is what I am. So writing this like secret world under a lake, and these alegrías that come to life, and writing this sort of fantastical world, but that is a fantastical world that reflects real life and who we are in real life, and intersectional identity, is something that I'm just still kind of pinching myself that I get to do.
No, yeah, I just remember first seeing that cover and just like, I as a person, I just, as a practical matter, do not cry, but like I definitely had an emotion to just seeing that cover, and like seeing two just trans non-binary brown people there, and just like I'm like, wow, I don't think I've ever seen this before, like two brown trans characters on a book just like existing. And as someone who was like also just all three of those things too, it was just incredible to see that existence, and to see those similarities I have with Bastion and Lore as I got into the book, and this sort of like resonating experience as someone who grew up seeing none of those experiences in the books I read. And so it was just a really beautiful thing, and I know that just the impact it's going to have is going to be beyond imaginable and so beautiful. Yeah, I'm really glad that we get to be in an existence where Lakelore is going to be part of that world too. And all your books, the Mirror Season and When the Moon Was Ours, and all of these works that we can go and find and read. Yeah, we are nearing the end of our time, so I definitely want to give you a moment to just like, where can the people find you? Where can the kids find you? Your books that you want to blurb real quick, any of that.
You can find me online at my website, which is author.annamarie.mclemore.com. You can find me on Twitter at @laannamarie. So yeah, that's where I am online. And what was I think you asked another question.
Oh yeah, if you want to like blurb any of your books real quick, give a quick shout out to any of them.
Are you talking about like books I'm reading as a reader lately?
Oh, like Mirror Season, or like.
Oh, sorry, I guess like.
No, you're good. You're good.
Took, like at this time, like I.
No, yeah, no, you're totally.
All the way through that without being like I don't understand the question. Okay, so I'll say real quick that like the Mirror Season, which just came out this spring. I keep looking the wrong way because StreamYard helpfully reverses stuff. So the Mirror Season came out in March, and it's like, I'll just say like it's a book about like pansexuality, dulce, and like how your community like helps you move forward, and how you like move forward with the people who love you. Yeah, Lakelore, which we've gotten to talk about, is like my book about like a secret world under a lake, and non-binary identity, and neurodivergence, and being Latinx, and just like a lot of things all together at once, which is very fitting for a book that's about ADHD. And then I have my Self-Made Boys, which is my Great Gatsby reimagining, coming out next fall, which like I'm writing transgender Gatsby. I'm writing like Gatsby and Nick as I like always thought they were. Like I always thought they were into each other when I read that book. So I'm so excited.
I equally excited. And I am Jonny Garza Villa. You can find me on Twitter at Jonny Escribe, on Instagram at Jonny Instas, and my website, jonnygarzavilla.com. And you can purchase my debut book, 1500 Miles from the Sun, which is basically Selena's Dreaming of You, but if you make it gay. And yeah, thank you so much for joining me, Anna Marie, and for imparting your knowledge and wisdom to me and the children all gathered here, to everyone watching. It was such a fun hour to spend with you. And thank all of y'all for attending the Magical Realism and the Latinx Queer Experience panel at the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. I hope y'all will stick around for all the amazing panels happening today, and please stay tuned for a video from our sponsor, Penguin Random House.
Hi everyone, I'm Judith Huerta from Penguin Young Readers, and today I'm here with Danielle Presley.
Hi everyone.
To share some of our favorite books by Latinx and Hispanic creators. We have lots of exciting titles to share with you, some that are available now and some that are publishing next spring. There's a lot to cover, so let's get started.
Okay, and so first up, we have the duo behind Last Up on Market Street is back with another stunning and poignant picture book about the impact of incarceration on families with 6-star reviews. There's been a lot of love for Milo, so I hope this isn't your first time hearing about this special book. So Milo is on a long subway ride with his older sister, and to pass time, he studies the faces around him and makes pictures of their lives. There's the boy in the suit with the bright white sneakers, and Milo imagines him arriving home to a castle with a drawbridge and a butler. But then the boy in the suit gets off on the same stop as Milo. He walks the same path and gets in the long line at the exact same place. And it turns out that both Milo and the boy in the suit are there to visit their incarcerated mothers. And Milo realizes maybe you can't really know anyone just by looking at their face. And so this book is a book that means a lot to both Matt and Christian, and they both strive to tell stories about underrepresented children in a kid-friendly way. And so The Cot in the Living Room is a great picture book for teaching community and empathy. The story centers around a young Dominican-American girl in New York City whose parents babysit children of families who work overnight shifts. So night after night, she watches as her mom sets up a cot in the living room for guests, and she's jealous of all the things that she thinks they're gonna do while she's stuck in her bedroom that she shares with her sister who snores. This is until one night when there's no one to babysit, she finally gets a chance at sleeping on the cot and learns that the living room isn't all she thought it would be. This book is a celebration of the ways a Dominican-American community takes care of one another, while also showing young readers that sometimes the best way to be a better neighbor is by imagining how it feels to spend the night sleeping on someone else's pillow.
For people who don't live near the border, we often only see pictures of heartbreak on the news. Only the worst is shown to us, but our author and illustrator have flipped that perception on its head in My Two Border Towns. Author David Bowles and illustrator Erika Mesa show us that the border isn't as gray and bleak as it seems. Rather, it's bursting with color. In My Two Border Towns, a boy and his father visit the town on the other side, el otro lado. It's close, and it's a twin of where he lives. Abuela warms up tortillas on a comal, children play soccer in alleys, and Spanish is spoken everywhere just the same. On the other side lives a community that's full of life, a community that laughs and loves just like us on this side. But if we're so alike, why must we be separated by the people-made construct of a border? This book is also available in Spanish as Mis dos pueblos fronterizos. Sing With Me is the story of Selena Quintanilla, the queen of all things Tejano music, as told by Diana Lopez and illustrated by Teresa Martinez. Throughout the story, these two creators share with young readers Selena's love of music, fashion, and her Mexican-American heritage in such a beautiful way. We start out our journey with Selena as a young girl. She's just beginning her journey into music and learning Spanish. As we follow along in her story, we see Selena rise to fame. There's a spread in this book where we see her performing at the Houston Astrodome to thousands of people, and it's absolutely breathtaking. This book is also available in Spanish as Canta Conmigo, and we also have an educator guide and downloadable activities on our website.
So as 2021 is ending, we're coming to a close of year one of the She Persisted chapter book series, but fear not, we have more coming in 2022. And if you're not aware of what the She Persisted chapter book series is, we signed up 13 talented award-winning children's writers to expand and provide more information about the women included in the She Persisted picture book line. And each writer chose a woman to write about that she felt connected to for one reason or another, and we're publishing one book a month. And this past June, She Persisted Sonia Sotomayor published, written by Meg Medina, the award-winning author of Mercy Suarez Changes Gears and Mango, Abuela, and Me. Now, if you read and loved Elizabeth Acevedo's The Poet X, then you have to put Elizabeth Velasquez's When We Make It high on your TBR pile. This is a debut YA novel in verse that changes the definition of making it. It's a love letter to girls who were taught to believe that they wouldn't make it at all, and who, against all odds, find a way to celebrate themselves in the ways in which they've been denied. This is a powerful and evocative coming-of-age story, and it touches on themes of mental illness, sexual assault, food insecurity, and gentrification.
Living Beyond Borders is a breathtaking anthology of short stories, essays, poems, and more from 20 celebrated and award-winning authors. This collection was edited by Margarita Longoria, and you can see all the contributors' names around the border of the cover. The authors represented share about the borders they have crossed, the struggles they have pushed through, and the two cultures they continue to navigate as Mexican Americans. Everything about this anthology is powerful, so be sure to check it out. And now moving on to a spring 2022 sneak peek. We have lots of exciting books coming up in this next season, starting off with The Year We Learned to Fly, Jacqueline Woodson and Rafael Lopez, highly anticipated companion to their #1 New York Times bestseller, The Day You Begin, illuminates the power in each of us to face challenges with confidence. Just Help is from the author of the New York Times bestseller, Just Ask. And in this one, it's about a fun and meaningful story about making the world and your community better, one action at a time, that asks the question, who will you help today? With Lots of Love is a beautiful lyrical story about a girl who moves from her home in Central America to the US and everything she leaves behind and longs for, especially her abuela, as she makes a new life. Moving on to older fiction and nonfiction, Who Was the Voice of the People? Discover the story behind Cesar Chavez and the Delano grape strike in Who Was the Voice of the People? Written by award-winning author Terry Blas and illustrated by Ignaz-nominated cartoonist Mar Julia. Diamond Park is a fast-paced YA novel about 4 Mexican-American teenagers from Houston, a '59 Chevy Impala, and a murder that changes their lives forever. And finally, we have Flirting with Fate. In this one, Jane the Virgin meets the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants in New York Times bestselling author J.C. Cervantes' charming romantic YA debut.
And then quickly on this last side, we have a group of some of our backlist titles by Latinx and Hispanic creators spanning our different age groups, including Pearl Bell Prey honors and winners like Lucky Broken Girl, First Rule of Punk, My Papi Has a Motorcycle, They Call Me Guero, and We Are Not From Here. So this is just a small sampling of what we have to offer.
And that is it from us today. Here's some info on where you can find us, and make sure to check out penguinclassroom.com. We're updating the site constantly with materials for you to use, sneak peeks, videos, and tons more content. So that is all from us. Have a great day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.